Hello, welcome back to the Cubase Fundamentals course. Today we're going to be having a deep dive on the Quantize panel. Some pretty advanced stuff in there to look at. Before we do, check out my Patreon link below if you haven't already. By far the best way to support the channel, help me carry on making this content. You get to download all of these projects as we go and you can follow this stuff side by side. Now then, a few bits of housekeeping to do before we move on. I'm just going to make all of my tracks one row high so that we can see what I'm doing. This keyboard line wants to be below my guitars. I need to make a group track for it. So it's going to output to the master bus. It's going to be called keys master. It's going to be dark green because that's my keys group color. And it's going to live just below the guitar master. Then we've got a problem with all of these mute states. Mute states on tracks like this are a bit clunky. That's not really the way to manage it. And so I want to deactivate all of these mute states all in one go. If you have a look in your key commands and search for mute, this is the one, deactivate all mute states. So I've got it Control-Shift-Q. I don't know what the standard Cubase value is. It could be that. But if I press Control-Shift-Q, just gets rid of all of those mute symbols all in one go. And the only one that I'm going to bring back in is this vocal line. The vocal line is currently on the naughty step, might not survive much longer, but just for now I'm going to mute it and make a decision on that another time. I've also got this MIDI track at the bottom that I want to get rid of. Don't need that anymore. Okay, neat and tidy, lovely. So where we left it last time, the keyboard line had been perfectly quantized to the 16th lines, so all of the starts and ends are all absolutely perfect. Let's have a look in our history. All we can see in it is the stuff that we've just done today. None of that quantizing stuff that we did in the last episode is still here. Every time you save and reopen your project, the history is reset to 0. But that doesn't mean we've actually lost our quantized data. I can still revert back to the original as extracted from the audio positions that we started with. And I can do that by clicking the Reset Quantize button. Let's do that now. And so you can see a new value is being added to the history and all of the notes have just been moved back to where they were from the guitar line. If I re-quantize that now, just press Q and then press Freeze MIDI Quantize. This is the new absolute 0 positions for those notes. So now if I reset Quantize, it doesn't undo past this point. That freeze has set these points in stone at those locations. Just bear in mind, however, if I Control Z, we can still step past that quantize value. So while this project is currently open, until I shut it down and reopen it again, we've got one final opportunity to undo. And in fact, I am going to leave it here because I want to play with it a little bit while it's slightly unquantized. And so now that this orange line here, this is my current history line, I can move that wherever I want. And you can see the project dynamically updating to match. But from this point onwards, if I now perform a new operation, it'll generate a new branch in history. So if, for instance, I pick this note up and move it, we've now lost those grayed out. Those edit operations are now done and gone forever. So the moment you perform a proactive action in Cubase, then you lose any stuff that you've undone up to that point. Now that I picked that note up and physically moved it, if I press Reset Quantize, that note doesn't move anywhere. Physically picking a note up and moving it overrides the default position. It's as if you have recorded that note at that point in time. Okay, let's have a look at this mysterious Quantize panel and see what it's all about. Well, predominantly it's all about capturing complex grooves or performing complex operations on Quantize beyond the standard musical notation stuff we've got here. Our Quantize grid updates in the interface, so that's just the same setting. Swing is a subject beyond today. You can see visually what it's doing it's making a long note and a short note. I've actually done a pretty comprehensive video on swing, so I'll put a link to that above. Catch range is the zone. I'll show you the visual representation of it. That green zone is if a note lies within that catch range, it will be quantized. If it doesn't lie inside that catch range, it won't. And so I did a little practice earlier on these two notes to find out what the values were. This F3 here turns out to be 13% away from the current quantize level. So if I set my catch range to 15% and quantize, the note moves. Just undo. Set my catch range down to 12%, quantize, the note doesn't move. So at 13, that's the minimum amount of catch range, this little green zone that's required in order to move the F3. What this means is that if I have multiple notes selected with a catch range, I'm saying only quantize the notes that are within this zone. So if I go up to 20% and quantize, F3 is going to be quantized, but E3 won't because it's too far away. Just gets left alone because you're basically saying, I don't really know where I want this to be. You could be playing with swing and that might be in the right place, so just leave it alone. A similar kind of concept, but looking at it from a different perspective, is the safe range. What this basically means is a number of ticks within which notes will be left alone. So now you're saying, and it's red to show, if the note is within this range, don't touch it. So at 18 ticks, F3 is within the safe range and will therefore be left alone, whereas E3 is outside of the safe range and will be quantized. Okay. It might seem a little bit like head bending, but it is actually quite useful. The catch range in particular, if you set it to something fairly big like 30%, then if you've got a song that's swinging hard, and that link that I directed you to earlier talks all about swing, then it will safely leave those notes alone. But your safe range is saying notes that are close enough, you know, that are kind of in the ballpark of being on the beat, just leave them alone. You know, that's where I want my quantize level to be. Now be aware that both catch range and safe range have a fairly complex relationship with soft quantize. So we've currently got a soft quantize value of 80%. I think it was 60 in the last episode, but this is system wide. So if I do anything with that number in the meantime, it's going to change. It's currently set to 80. If I set my safe range to 16 ticks and quantize, then the F3 is being left alone because it's 14 ticks away from the beat line and so is considered to be safe. Whereas E3, which was outside of the safe range, has been quantized, but it's been quantized by 80%. I understand there's a lot to go at there. Understanding all three of those concepts all at once is going to be pretty much impossible in a kind of, you know, a dry presentation like this. You're just going to have to start using it. What are the things that I want to be left alone? What are the things I want to catch? And how much do I want to do with it after I've decided to catch it? That's basically what you're talking about. Let's turn all of that off. Down below this tuplet setting, the most common type of tuplet you'll ever see is the triplet. And what we're talking about here when we set tuplet to 3 is you can see this quantize grid. It's saying perform basically quantize in sets of 3 for this subdivision. Now this is such a common operation that it's actually a standard. You get triplet presets right out of the box, but you can also have more complex tuplets. So this is now saying 5 subdivisions within a quarter note grid. So here is our quarter note grid, and we've got 5 subdivisions within it. So that's a quintuplet, and then we've got hextuplets, septuplets, octuplets, non-octuplets, I think they're called. I can't exactly remember, but it gets crazy. But it's literally just the number of subdivisions within the beat. We have a drum beat, and this drum beat grooves pretty nicely. I want to quantize the rest of my song so that it follows this beat. Well, how do we do that? The answer is we pick the MIDI part up and we drag it onto the quantize bar. Bosh. And now you can see that the Quantize panel has set its quantize range to 8 bars to match the rhythm, and all of these tiny lines inside correspond to the drum beat itself. It's kind of staggering. So I can now use that as a quantize grid to apply to anything else. You see, in our quantize options, we no longer have 1/16. We've got this instrument 1. We can save this preset by pressing the little plus button, and now that's stored it in the project. It's no longer asterisked. It's actually a fundamental part of the project. You can rename the preset. That's pretty obvious stuff. And then if you decide that you don't want a particular preset, remove them from here. And this is project specific. So if we open any other project, you won't see this. So now if I select my keyboard line and I make sure that I don't have any notes selected, watch what happens when I press quantize. All of these notes have just moved to meet the nearest beat of this drum beat. So let's turn our keys on. You can see that I did that from the master track. So it's got that note wrong. Okay, just want to make sure that I've got no issues with overlaps, because it sounded like that second note was being cut off. And then I want to decide what to do with this note over here. So actually I'll undo both of those steps. That's just basically pressing undo Q twice. I know what it was. That's the note I moved earlier when I was doing the demonstration of manually moving a note. That should be on bar 7. Let's put that quantize back in and delete the overlaps just in case that stuff at the end was broken. Excellent. There's no way with that many beat subdivisions it was going to go so far wrong. And incredibly, we can do exactly the same thing with the guitar lines. So let's bring the guitars back in. And in order for this to work, we need to ensure that audio walk quantize is on. It's one of the options in the Quantize panel, and it is. So now when I press quantize, the audio moves. You can actually quantize multiple audio events simultaneously, but I'm doing them individually here so that we can see exactly what's going on. And so now all 3 of those bars have just been quantized to the drums. Let's hear what all that sounds like. So let's have a look at all of these options that we've got in this quantize grid. And position, by default, it's actually 100%. What 100% means is it's like turning soft quantize on or off. It's an internal soft quantize that applies just to this grid. Now, because I had it set to 90%, it's only actually quantizing those 3 parts, the keyboard and the two guitar lines, 90% of the way to the drum grid. I was just setting it up before the video and was just messing around with the different position values. So if I now click while we've got this audio selected, it's just moved it very, very slightly again. Just undo that. I'm perfectly happy with 90%. Just maintaining that little bit of variance is a good idea. You can have it take information from the feed line. We're feeding off a drum rhythm here. You can have it alter its quantizing values by velocity or length. I don't think I've ever set them beyond 0. I don't like the idea. But if you wanted to have it quantize more, if it was louder, for instance, then this is where you do it. Safe range we've seen earlier, that's leave stuff alone if it's within this close to correct anyway. And pre-quantize allows you to say quantize to 16ths, and then from there apply the groove quantize. It's like a preliminary step. What's the maximum distance you're going to allow a note to move? We set that here. We've got a very densely packed quantized grid here, but there's absolutely no reason for it to be that way. I'll demonstrate a much sparser grid very shortly. Just finish off with this last position. We've already seen rough in an earlier video. That's basically literally randomize, very slightly randomize the quantizing that you're doing. Original position is all about what happens if you've already done some quantizing operations. Let's say you record a note in and you're 50 ticks out, and then you press some soft quantizing that brings it within like 24 ticks. This original position checkbox tells the grid which of those two values to take its baseline from. I don't think I've ever used that feature, to be absolutely honest with you, but that's what it does. So here we have a very dense grid, and that's absolutely fine. But there is another way that you can generate quantized groove information as well. If I take this guitar arpeggio, you can see here there's a section of more than a bar and a half where I've only played a single note. So I could generate a groove quantize off this. The way that we do that is that we select the audio, go into hit points. If I turn hit points on, you can see all of these little lines. These are the subdivisions that mark out the groove grid. And I can say create groove. And now if we have a look in our Quantize panel, you'll see that in addition to the preset that I saved earlier, we've got a new one, Guitar Arpeggio 2. And there's a big gap here. So this is an example of something where if I didn't have a max move set and there was a note here, it would theoretically jump a very long distance to find the nearest groove line. Now this isn't a particularly good quantized grid to set because there's such a big gap here, but it's illustrative of the need to have a max move set if you're setting, because I could have taken, let's say for instance, this guitar part was the original determinant of the keyboard's quantized line. The keyboard was quantized exactly to this guitar line. So if at some point I decided I wanted to get the keyboard completely back in sync with that guitar, I could do it this way, create my groove, go into the keyboard line, and then quantize to the guitar groove, and then it will move the keyboard line to match the guitar groove. I'm going to undo that. I'm going to get rid of this second preset because we don't need it. That was just a demonstration thing. But this quantize here we'll stick with for the time being. We'll see how it works for us. We had it at 90%, and I'm happy to let that give us a chance to impress us. I'm just going to shut this panel down, deactivate all of my solo states so that I'm okay now to save this project. And that's where we'll pick up next time. Thanks very much for watching this one. Hope you enjoyed it. Please hit the like button if you did. I'll see you next time.